At first, everyone thought it was a coincidence. The gorilla sat in the same corner of the enrichment room, a broad back turned slightly away from the glass, a thick brush held with deliberate calm. The first painting drew smiles. A few visitors clapped softly. A caretaker laughed and said it looked focused, almost thoughtful. Someone snapped a photo and posted it online with a caption about animal intelligence. It was harmless, charming even. Then the second painting came. It looked exactly like the first. Same dark shape dominating the center. Same jagged edge cutting across the lower half. Same muted colors pressed into the canvas with identical pressure, as if measured by an invisible ruler. The caretakers shrugged it off. Animals repeated behaviors all the time. Routine was comforting. Repetition was normal. The third painting erased that comfort. By the 10th, the smiles faded. By the 50th, no one was laughing anymore. What unsettled them wasn't just the similarity. It was the precision. Each line landed in the same place. Each shadow bled outward at the same angle. There was no drift, no experimentation, no hesitation. It wasn't variation within a style. It was replication. Perfect, relentless replication. The gorilla never looked up when he painted. He didn't respond to voices, cameras, or applause. He didn't pause to observe his work, didn't tilt his head or adjust his grip. He painted as if following instructions only he could hear. When the canvas was finished, he placed the brush down, carefully stepped back, and waited. Not proudly, not expectantly, just still. The room felt different after that. The caretakers began lining the paintings along the wall to keep track. At first it was practical, then it became compulsive. They needed to see them together, needed to reassure themselves that small differences would appear if they looked closely enough. They never did. Standing in front of dozens of identical images produced a strange physical reaction. People described it later as a tightening in the chest, a sense that something was watching them from the paper. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the discomfort of realizing that what you were seeing wasn't meant for you. The number kept growing. 100, 200, 500. Visitors stopped calling them art. They started whispering instead. Some said it was boring. Others said it was disturbing. A few stopped watching altogether, unable to explain why the sight made them uneasy. Children asked why the gorilla never painted anything else. Parents didn't know how to answer. The gorilla aged while the paintings stayed the same. Seasons changed, staff rotated, new enrichment activities were introduced. The brushes were swapped, the colors were rearranged. Different canvases were offered different sizes, different textures. None of it mattered. The result was always identical. As if the gorilla wasn't responding to the tools at all, but to something fixed inside his mind. That was when the caretakers began to worry. Not because of what he was doing, but because of what he wasn't doing. There was no curiosity, no playfulness, no learning curve. Animals who painted for stimulation usually experimented. They splashed, smeared, explored. This was different. This was controlled, focused, almost ritualistic. One caretaker stayed late one night and laid all the completed paintings on the floor end to end until they filled the room. Under the fluorescent lights, the repetition became overwhelming. It felt less like an exhibit and more like evidence. Evidence of something looping, something stuck. She counted them twice just to be sure. 1,102. That number sat heavily in the air. It wasn't round, it wasn't neat. It felt unfinished, like a sentence cut off mid-thought. When she looked back at the gorilla through the glass, he wasn't watching her. He was staring at the empty space where the next canvas would go. The unease deepened. Why this image? Why this moment repeated with such discipline? Why did he never stop when his own experts were contacted? Behavioral notes were reviewed. The early reports were cautious, clinical. Repetitive behavior could indicate stress, or boredom, or neurological fixation. But none of those explanations fully fit. Stress behaviors usually escalated or shifted. Boredom led to distraction. This did neither. This was memory, not recalled but relived. The gorilla didn't paint faster or slower over time. His movements didn't degrade with age. Muscle memory carried him through the same motions with unwavering accuracy. It was as if the act of painting had nothing to do with creativity and everything to do with survival. That realization crept in quietly like cold air through a cracked window. What if these weren't paintings at all? What if they were records? The caretakers began to look at the image differently. They stopped asking what it meant and started asking when it was from. They noticed how the shadows fell, how the shapes aligned, how the composition felt less expressive and more documentary. One whispered thought spread through the team, unspoken but shared. This wasn't imagination. It was a place, a moment, a single memory replayed over and over, unchanged by time. The gorilla finished another painting that morning. He set the brush down, stepped back, and waited. No satisfaction, no relief, just patience. As if he believed that if he painted it enough times, someone would finally see what he couldn't explain. And standing there, surrounded by more than 1,000 identical images, the caretakers realized something that made their skin prickle with dread. Whatever the gorilla was showing them, it wasn't finished yet, and neither was the story behind it. The first person to say it out loud did so almost apologetically. "I don't think this is art anymore." The room fell quiet after that, not the awkward silence of disagreement, but the kind that arrives when a thought has already been shared by everyone, just not yet spoken. For weeks, the team had circled the same question without touching it directly. They used careful language pattern, habit preference, words that felt safe, words that implied control, but the evidence lining the walls refused to cooperate. The paintings were now cataloged, photographed, numbered, and archived. Side by side, they no longer looked curious or impressive. They looked intentional, disturbingly so. Each one carried the same visual weight, the same imbalance, the same dark mass, pressing into the frame as if trying to escape it. The longer you stared, the harder it became to tell where one ended and the next began. That was when doubt replaced fascination. Caretakers began reviewing footage, rewinding days and weeks of recordings. The gorilla's behavior was consistent beyond explanation. He approached the canvas at the same hour. He chose the brush without hesitation. His movements were neither rushed nor playful. There was no pause for choice, no moment of decision. It was execution, not exploration. Someone suggested boredom, someone else suggested routine. But routine, they realized, usually brought comfort. This brought tension. The gorilla's body language had changed subtly over time. His shoulders tightened when the canvas was brought in. His breathing slowed, not relaxed but controlled. When interrupted, he didn't protest or resist, he froze. Eyes fixed, muscles locked as if pulled back into something that demanded his full attention. That was when suspicion turned into concern. The staff began documenting not just the paintings but the gorilla himself. Appetite, sleep cycles, social interaction, all of it appeared normal at a glance. But normal, they were learning, could be deceptive. Trauma often hides behind functionality. The breakthrough came during a routine review meeting when a behavioral specialist pointed to a chart and asked a question no one had considered before. Why doesn't he ever stop on his own animals engaged in enrichment, typically lost interest? They wandered away. They tested boundaries. This gorilla did none of that. He didn't tire of the activity. He didn't seek novelty. He didn't choose rest over repetition. The painting session ended only when the canvas was removed. That detail landed heavily. If this wasn't something he enjoyed, then why persist? The answer began to take shape in the space between what was happening and what wasn't. There was no joy, no frustration, no expression at all, just completion, over and over, like a task that had to be done. Art, by definition, invites interpretation, but this felt closer to documentation. The lines weren't expressive, they were exact. The shapes weren't symbolic, they were specific. And specificity suggested reference. A memory, perhaps. The team decided to bring in outside experts, not to celebrate the phenomenon, but to understand it. Trauma specialists, comparative psychologists, people who studied memory and nonverbal species. They came quietly without cameras or announcements, and they watched. What they saw unsettled them. One expert noted that the gorilla never adjusted his composition to the canvas size. The image simply scaled, maintaining proportion as if governed by an internal blueprint. Another observed that the pressure applied to the brush remained constant across every painting, regardless of fatigue. Muscle memory at work, refined to an almost mechanical degree. But it was the third expert who changed everything. She stood in front of the paintings for a long time longer than anyone else had. Then she turned and said very calmly, "This isn't creativity, this is recall." The word hung in the air. Recall meant memory, not learned behavior, not conditioned response. Memory stored vivid, unchanging. She explained that in cases of extreme trauma, the brain could become locked onto a single moment, a moment so intense that it eclipsed everything that followed. For humans, this might surface as flashbacks or compulsions. For animals without language, it could emerge through repetition, especially repetition that involves sensory mapping. The paintings she suggested were not an attempt to communicate. They were an attempt to survive the memory that reframed everything. The staff began to see the paintings not as output, but as coping. Each canvas wasn't an act of expression, it was a grounding ritual, a way to keep the memory contained, controlled, externalized. Without it, the gorilla might be forced to relive the moment internally without structure. The fear crept in quietly after that. If this was memory, then it had an origin, and origins could be traced. They dug into records, old transfers, rescue notes, fragmented documentation from years before. What they found was incomplete at first, missing pages, vague descriptions, redacted details. But patterns emerged, references to an incident, a separation, a loss that had never been fully explored because no one knew how to ask the gorilla what he remembered. Until now. One night, as the staff prepared to close, a caretaker paused in front of the latest painting. She had seen it 1,000 times, but this time she noticed something new. Not a difference, but an absence. There were no signs of the present, no hint of where the gorilla was now, no enclosure, no sky as it existed today. The image belonged to another time entirely, a time that had never moved on. The realization settled into something heavier than concern. It became fear. Not fear of the gorilla, but fear for him. Fear of what it meant to be trapped in a single moment for years, replaying it with unwavering fidelity. Fear of what might happen if the ritual was interrupted, or worse, if it continued forever. The team stopped discussing the paintings publicly. No more lighthearted comments, no more applause from visitors. The activity was quietly removed from the enrichment schedule, not as punishment, but as protection. And when the gorilla noticed its absence, his reaction was immediate. He didn't protest. He waited. He stood where the canvas should have been, staring at the empty space, body, still eyes fixed. Minutes passed, then longer. The staff watched, unsure whether to intervene. The room felt heavier with every second. Eventually, they brought the canvas back. The gorilla approached it without hesitation and began again. That was when the final doubt disappeared. This wasn't art. It was a warning. A warning that something unresolved was living just beneath the surface. Something that time had not erased. Something that had been asking to be seen for over 1,000 silent repetitions. And as the brush moved across the canvas once more, the fear shifted from what the gorilla remembered to what the humans were about to uncover. Because whatever that image represented, it had waited long enough, and now it was demanding to be understood. The truth did not announce itself all at once. It arrived in fragments, quiet details that had always been there, waiting for someone to look at them without expectation. Once the team stopped asking what the paintings meant and started asking what they showed, the image began to change in their minds. Not on the canvas, in themselves. They removed the frames and laid the canvases flat under neutral light. No dramatic angles, no shadows, just clarity. The repetition that had once numbed them now sharpened their focus. When you see the same thing more than 1,000 times, your eyes stop wandering. They learn where to rest, and where they rested was not random. The central dark mass wasn't abstract. Its edges were too deliberate. The negative space around it wasn't decorative. It was measured. The angle of a lighter shape, barely noticeable at first, repeated with mathematical discipline. Someone overlaid a grid. Someone else traced lines. Slowly, reluctantly, the picture aligned with something else entirely. A place. The experts asked for old records, not summaries, not curated reports, but raw files. Transfer logs, rescue notes, archived photographs that had never been intended for public viewing. They followed the trail backward through years of paperwork and partial memories until the story stopped being theoretical. There had been an incident. Years ago, before the gorilla ever held a brush, There was a rescue that never made headlines. A routine operation documented quickly and filed away. The language was clinical, efficient. It mentioned loss without describing it, trauma without naming it. At the time, no one had asked what the gorilla saw. They focused on what they could save. Now, with the paintings spread out like a silent archive, they asked again. The old photographs were pulled from storage, grainy, faded, taken from angles meant to record facts, not feelings. When the images were placed next to the paintings, the room changed. It wasn't a resemblance, it was a match. The proportions lined up first, then the shadows, then the placement of a jagged line where something solid once lay. The darker mass at the center was not symbolic, it was literal. The canvas wasn't expressing emotion, it was recording position. The gorilla had not been inventing an image. He had been remembering a moment. The moment his world stopped. The files described what happened in neutral terms. An encounter, a sudden loss, a delay before help arrived. But they did not describe what it meant to be there. What it meant to be small, pinned beneath the weight of something that had once been safety. What it meant to breathe the same air for hours, to feel the world go quiet in a way that never truly ended. The paintings showed that moment from one angle only, his. Experts explained that memory in gorillas is not fleeting. It is spatial, sensory, emotional. When trauma occurs at a young age, especially during a period of dependency, the brain can lock onto the scene with brutal fidelity. Not as a story, but as a map. A map you return to when you don't know how to move forward. The team stood in front of the canvases again this time, knowing what they were looking at. The unease deepened into something heavier, grief perhaps, or shame. Not for what had happened, no one could undo that, but for how long it had gone unseen. Over 1,000 times the gorilla had recreated the same map. Over 1,000 times he had been standing there, trying to place the memory somewhere outside his body so it wouldn't consume him from the inside. No one had taught him to paint this way. No one had asked him to. The brush was simply the first tool that allowed the memory to exist safely in the open. On the canvas, it was contained, predictable, manageable. Inside him, it was none of those things. The most unsettling realization came last. The paintings did not include him. There was no self-portrait, no mark that suggested presence. He was not in the image because in that moment he had disappeared. Trauma had erased his sense of self, leaving only the scene behind. That absence spoke louder than any color or line. This was not storytelling, it was survival. Once the memory was identified, everything else made sense. The precision, the lack of variation, the refusal to stop. This wasn't a habit, it was a vigil. A way of standing watch over something unfinished, something that had never been acknowledged in the only language available to him. The experts debated what to do next. There was no manual for this. No established protocol for helping a gorilla release a memory he could not name. Interruption could cause collapse. Ignoring it would mean allowing the loop to continue indefinitely. One expert said quietly, "He's not asking us to fix it." She paused. "He's asking us to see it." That changed the conversation. The goal shifted from stopping the behavior to understanding it fully. The team began documenting the paintings not as anomalies but as testimony. Each canvas became evidence not of pathology but of endurance. Proof that the gorilla had carried this memory alone for years, maintaining control through repetition because no one had shown him another way. They stopped calling the image the painting. They started calling it the moment. The gorilla was observed more closely after that, not to correct him but to accompany him. When he painted, someone stayed nearby, not watching, not commenting, simply present. The difference was subtle but real. His breathing changed slightly. His shoulders lowered a fraction. The room no longer felt like a stage. For the first time, the act of painting was not solitary, and for the first time, the team understood that what had been hidden in plain sight was never meant to shock or impress. It was meant to persist, to remain visible until someone was willing to meet it with patience rather than curiosity. The memory had been there all along, hanging quietly on the walls. What changed was not the image. It was the way humans finally learned how to look at it. And with that recognition came a sobering truth, understanding the memory was only the beginning. Seeing it did not dissolve it. Naming it did not release it. But it did open a door. A door the gorilla had been standing in front of for years, brush in hand, waiting for someone to realize that the story on the canvas was not the end of his past, but the beginning of his healing. Healing did not arrive as a breakthrough. There was no single moment when the gorilla put down the brush and suddenly became free. No dramatic shift, no visible relief that cameras could capture. What followed the recognition of the memory was quieter, slower, and far more fragile than anyone expected. Because no one had ever taught a gorilla how to heal, the team understood one thing immediately: the paintings could not simply be taken away. They were not a habit to break. They were a structure that had kept him standing. Remove them too quickly and the memory would have nowhere to go except back into his body. The experts agreed on a principle borrowed from human trauma: care adapted cautiously and imperfectly. You do not erase a coping mechanism until you offer something safer to replace it. But what does safer mean to an animal who cannot name fear, grief, or loss? They began not with change, but with permission. The gorilla was allowed to paint exactly as he always had. Same canvas, same colors, same image, no interference. The only difference was presence. A familiar caregiver sat within sight, not watching the painting, not reacting to it, simply existing in the same space. Breathing, turning pages of a book, offering no demands. At first, the gorilla did not acknowledge this at all. He painted as if alone. But over time, something subtle shifted. The rigid rhythm of his movements softened slightly. The pauses between strokes grew longer. He began occasionally to glance sideways, not toward the person, but toward the empty space between them. It was the first sign that the memory no longer had exclusive ownership of his attention. The team introduced small changes with almost painful slowness: a different texture of canvas, a new shade mixed carefully into the palette. Each adjustment was monitored not for artistic outcome, but for physiological response. Heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, stress markers that could not lie. Some changes failed immediately. A new color caused agitation. A different brush triggered withdrawal. Those were removed without hesitation. The goal was not progress, it was trust. Trust that the world could change without collapsing. One expert compared the process to teaching someone to walk on a healed but fragile leg. You don't test strength by pushing. You test it by standing nearby and waiting to see if the person chooses to shift their weight on their own. Weeks passed, then months. The paintings continued, but they began to change in ways so slight that no one noticed at first. A line curved differently, a shadow softened at the edge. The central dark mass remained, but its boundaries loosened. It no longer dominated the entire canvas. Space appeared around it, quiet, deliberate space. The experts did not celebrate this. Celebration implies expectation. Expectation creates pressure. Pressure breaks trust. Instead, they adjusted their understanding. The gorilla was not being taught how to forget. He was being taught how to carry the memory without letting it define every movement. One of the most important interventions came not through art, but through routine. The gorilla's day was reshaped carefully to include predictable moments of agency. He was given choices that mattered: which area to explore, which enrichment object to interact with, whether to paint now or later. Choice is a powerful antidote to trauma. When a being has lived through an event where choice was stripped away, even small decisions can begin to rebuild a sense of control. The gorilla responded to this more than anyone had hoped. He became less rigid in his schedule, less distressed by minor disruptions. His attention widened beyond the memory. And then came the hardest step. One day, a second canvas was placed nearby, not as a replacement, but as an option. It was blank, clean, untouched. The original canvas remained exactly where it always had. No one pointed to the new one. No one suggested anything. The gorilla noticed it immediately. He did not approach it. He painted the original image again, perhaps more carefully than ever, as if reaffirming its importance. But when he finished, he did not leave the space right away. He sat. He looked. His gaze moved between the two canvases with an intensity that made the observers hold their breath. Minutes passed. He stood, walked to the blank canvas and touched it with his fingers. No paint, just touch. That was enough. From that day on, the second canvas remained. Sometimes he ignored it. Sometimes he stood near it without using it. And once, weeks later, he made a single mark on it, a line that did not resemble the memory at all. The experts recorded this without commentary. Healing, they understood now, was not about replacing the old image with a new one. It was about expanding the world enough that the old image no longer filled it entirely. The gorilla continued to paint the memory for a long time after that, but the frequency decreased, not because he was discouraged, but because he no longer needed it as often. Other behaviors emerged: exploration, play, social curiosity. The world began to compete with the past. One caregiver described it simply: he's not stuck there all the time anymore. That was the measure of success. Not happiness, not normalcy, just movement. The team remained cautious. Trauma does not move in straight lines. Some days the gorilla returned to the memory with renewed intensity, as if something unseen had reopened the wound. On those days, the response was the same as always: presence, patience, permission. No one tried to rush him forward, because healing was not something they were doing to him. It was something they were finally doing with him. By allowing the memory to exist without fear, by offering choice, without pressure, and by respecting the intelligence behind the behavior, instead of trying to suppress it, the team had done something rare. They had treated the gorilla not as a subject to be corrected, but as a being capable of his own recovery. And slowly, so slowly, that it could only be seen in hindsight, the memory began to loosen its grip. Not erased, not forgotten, but no longer alone. The brush was still there, the canvas was still there, but now so was the world, and that made all the difference. No one noticed it at first. That was the strange part. After years of watching, cataloging, comparing, and measuring every canvas down to the smallest detail, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived quietly, without ceremony, without warning. The painting that finally changed did not announce itself. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, different enough to matter, subtle enough to be overlooked. The gorilla approached the canvas the way he always did. Same time of day, same steady pace, same familiar weight in his shoulders as he settled in front of the easel. To anyone passing by, nothing about that morning would have stood out. The routine was intact, the ritual unchanged. He picked up the brush, but the first stroke was wrong. Not wrong in the sense of mistake, wrong in the sense of unfamiliar. The hand hesitated. The line drifted slightly off its usual path, curved where it should have cut straight across. It was so minor that even the cameras didn't flag it. Only later, frame by frame, did anyone realize the significance of that pause. The gorilla stopped painting. That had never happened before. He did not freeze or tense. He did not show distress. He simply sat there, brush resting loosely in his fingers, eyes fixed on the mark he had just made. For nearly a full minute, he did nothing. No rocking, no repetition, just stillness. Stillness had once been dangerous for him. It was the space where the memories surged back, unfiltered and overwhelming. But this stillness felt different. It was deliberate, observant. He leaned closer to the canvas. The familiar shape, the one that had appeared more than 1,000 times, was not complete. The dark mass was there, but it had not yet taken over the surface. There was space left around it. Empty space, untouched space. And for the first time, he did not immediately fill it. He dipped the brush again, slower now, and added another line. This one was lighter, thinner. It did not reinforce the old image. It moved away from it. The observers noticed then. Someone whispered. Someone else leaned forward. No one spoke aloud. Years of restraint held them in place. They had learned the cost of reacting too soon. The gorilla worked without urgency. His movements lacked the compulsive intensity that had once defined these sessions. He paused between strokes, occasionally pulling his hand back, as if reconsidering, as if the act itself required thought now. The painting that emerged was not a rejection of the old one. The central form remained unmistakable in its outline, but it was no longer alone. Shapes surrounded it, soft, incomplete, exploratory. Lines that did not close in on themselves. Colors that had never appeared before. It was not a happy image. It was something far more unsettling. It was an image in transition. When the gorilla finished, he did not step back the way he usually did. He stayed close, head tilted, studying the canvas with an intensity that suggested recognition rather than compulsion. His breathing was steady, his posture relaxed. Then he did something that caused several experts to look away in disbelief. He reached out and touched the paint, not smearing it, not disrupting it. Just a single finger pressed lightly against a section that had never existed before one of the new shapes. He held it there for a moment, then withdrew his hand and rested it against his chest. No one had taught him to do that. The gesture was not part of any training, any enrichment program, any observed behavior pattern. It was spontaneous, intimate, and deeply human in its resonance. The painting was cataloged later as always, photographed, measured, compared. Algorithms confirmed what human eyes had already felt in their bones. This canvas did not match the others. It broke the sequence. Out of 102 paintings, this was the first that could not be layered perfectly on top of the rest. The deviation was undeniable. But what mattered more was not what had changed on the canvas. It was what had changed in him. In the days that followed, the gorilla did not abandon the old image entirely. He returned to it sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of need. Healing, after all, does not move forward without occasionally looking back. But the rigidity was gone. The urgency softened. And sometimes, rarely but enough to matter, he chose the blank canvas instead. Those paintings were quieter, less defined. They didn't repeat. They wandered. The experts stopped calling them anomalies. They stopped calling them breakthroughs. They started calling them choices. The final painting, the one that marked the shift, was never put on display. It was not sold, replicated, or turned into a headline. It lived in a controlled archive, referenced only when necessary, respected for what it represented rather than what it proved. Because the truth was uncomfortable. The gorilla had not been demonstrating artistic talent. He had been demonstrating memory. And now finally he was demonstrating something else. Adaptation. The ability to carry the past without being trapped inside it. The ability to allow change without fear. The ability to move however slowly towards something unknown. No one claimed he was healed. That word implies an ending. What he had done was far more honest. He had taken the first step away from a single story and toward a larger one that included the memory but was no longer ruled by it. The painting that finally changed did not erase the past. It made room beside it. And for the gorilla who had once been defined by repetition, that quiet expansion of possibility was nothing short of extraordinary. In the end, what this story leaves us with is not amazement at a gorilla's talent, but a quiet reckoning with ourselves. For years, the world looked at those identical paintings and searched for spectacle. People wanted a miracle, a mystery, a shortcut to wonder. But the truth revealed itself slowly, almost reluctantly. What we were witnessing was not creativity in the way humans usually define it, but memory repeating itself because it had nowhere else to go. The canvas became a place where pain could exist without words, where experience could survive without explanation. And that is the first lesson this story teaches us. Repetition is not always habit, it can be survival. When someone returns again and again to the same thought, the same behavior, the same memory, it does not mean they are broken or unwilling to change. Sometimes it means they are holding on to the only structure that feels safe. Understanding begins when we stop asking, why won't this stop, and start asking, what is this protecting? The second lesson is even harder to accept. Healing cannot be forced, accelerated, or engineered. No amount of observation, analysis, or expectation could make that painting change. The moment it did was not triggered by pressure, reward, or intervention. It happened when space was finally allowed space to pause, to hesitate, to choose differently. True growth does not arrive on command. It arrives when trust replaces urgency. There is also a profound message here about patience. The people who stayed, who watched quietly for years without demanding results, were not waiting for proof. They were practicing respect. In a world obsessed with outcomes, this story reminds us that presence matters more than progress. Sometimes the most meaningful transformations happen when no one is applauding, filming, or judging. Perhaps the most unsettling lesson is this: intelligence and emotion do not belong exclusively to humans. The gorilla did not need language to remember, to feel, or to adapt. He needed time, safety, and the freedom to explore something new without fear of punishment. That realization challenges the boundaries we draw between ourselves and other beings, and asks us to reconsider how often we underestimate lives that look different from our own. But above all, this story is about hope that does not shout. The painting that finally changed did not erase the past. It did not pretend the pain was gone. It simply made room for something else to exist beside it. And isn't that what healing really looks like for all of us? Not forgetting, not denying, but allowing the future to sit next to the past without being consumed by it. If this story stayed with you, it's because it reflects something deeply human. We all carry memories we didn't choose. We all repeat patterns that once kept us safe. And we all need time before we are ready to make even the smallest change. That is why stories like this matter. They remind us to slow down, to listen longer, to judge less, and to believe that transformation, real transformation, often begins in silence. If you believe in the power of stories that challenge how we see the world, inspire empathy, and reveal unexpected truths, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and gives us the motivation to continue sharing moments that move the heart, awaken understanding, and remind us that meaning can appear in the most unexpected places. Stay with us. There are many more stories waiting to be told.